The Fall Guy is a 2024 action comedy blockbuster released by Universal Studios that follows a stuntman, Cole Seavers, played by Ryan Gosling, as he uncovers a Hollywood-level conspiracy involving the disappearance of a world-famous actor while trying to rekindle his romance with a big-budget film director played by Emily Blunt, who's essentially the in-universe Michael Bay of this movie. Now, The Fall Guy has had kind of an uphill battle since it was first announced. It's a loose remake of a television series of the same name, changing and modernizing certain elements to be more updated. Like, for instance, the love interest is no longer the stunt guy's doting assistant, she's the filmmaker, she's the director, she's got more power here than a woman on a TV show in the 70s usually would have. And whereas in the show, the lead stuntman was a bounty hunter in his spare time, here he's just a stuntman who happens to get involved in some shady activities. And maybe the decision to change Ryan Gosling's character from a bounty hunter to just a regular stuntman was after the popularity of Drive, where he'd just be playing kind of a similar role, but I don't think it's exactly that. Now, The Fall Guy released May 3rd, the first weekend of the summer, which is usually a big time for movies. Last year we had Guardians 3. Before that we had Doctor Strange 2 and Top Gun. And now it's The Fall Guy's turn, and well, the movie kind of flopped. Like, it made $28 million in its opening weekend on a budget of $130 million, which isn't really that good. You're not breaking even. You're not doubling in profit what you spent. You're not even making your money back. You're losing money. And in an era where reboots and remakes and sequels are kind of king in Hollywood and IP is the holy grail, it's kind of a major letdown for a film that's basically an original story. And The Fall Guy should work. It has a lot of elements that should work. It's PG-13. It has fun jokes. It has good romance, but it's not too sexual. There's violence, but it's not too bloody. The whole family could see it. Older audiences will want to see it because of the show it's based on. You'll have younger teenagers who will be drawn because of Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt. It just seems like it would appeal to everyone, so what went wrong? This still is an original blockbuster with Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt and the action comedy aspect doing the heavy lifting of making people want to go see this summer. It's a big popcorn original temple that promises to be filled with action comedy, great movie to watch, but in some aspects it just doesn't work. And in some aspects it does work. A lot of people have said the movie is fun, and the reviews have been mostly positive. I know people hate Rotten Tomatoes, but with 87% of people saying that they enjoyed it, and even close friends of mine calling it a lot of fun, the consensus is in, and it is a fun summer blockbuster that almost tricks you with its charm. In fact, one of the top reviews on Letterboxd says the movie might be a bit of a mess, but Ryan Gosling wins them over with their charm. So despite people loving it, beneath the film, there's something that kind of doesn't work, something that's kind of broken. And I want to get into that today to discuss how a fun movie can fail, and how even an enjoyable summer blockbuster with no superheroes or ugly CGI in sight can be broken. So, one of the reasons The Fall Guy is not a successful film is it has flat characters. Now let me explain what I mean by that. The movie really has Ryan Gosling starring in this, and everyone's kind of saying how charming he is. And I think the charm is kind of a cover for something. It's a cover for flat character. And let me explain what I mean. You have several characters, all of whom are kind of flat, and without real depth or purpose. What you see is what you get. And it kind of takes away from the film, or at least having characters you can invest your time in. Iron Man doesn't have this problem because he's a very well-developed character. You see how he goes from zero to hero, or at least genius playboy and millionaire, without a thought about anyone else, into a man who cares about others, a hero who uses his powers for good. Jack Sparrow also doesn't have this problem. You see his flaws and how he works around them. Despite the fact that he's kind of drunk and kind of clumsy, it serves a purpose. He uses this demeanor and this front to get what he wants. He's charming, he knows everyone, he's always got something up his sleeve. He's a fun-zany character who, despite his initial misgivings, always ends up on top. Or there's Bruce Wayne, who goes from protected and wealthy traumatized child to defender of the innocent. He starts off spoiled, almost unaware of how crime has affected members of a city because he lives such a sheltered life, until he dives headfirst into the darkness and faces his fears head on. And we've seen that in a million different incarnations of Batman media, but you get my point. These characters work and stand the test of time because there's something similar that holds them together. We have a key cause to root for them, and it makes them interesting. We understand where they come from, we get their backstory, and why they do what they do. The Fall Guy, however, leaves a bit to be desired in that department. It falls flat with character, which makes the big mistake of mostly leaving the characters to serve the story it's trying to tell, instead of giving them any proper backstory. Take, for example, Cole Seavers' backstory. We learn about him through the beginning, but it's not enough to warrant a whole film where we care about this character. The opening introduces a montage of many famous action films and sets out this thesis idea that stuntmen are these unseen heroes. And I really do like the choice with this montage. It makes a really good and honest point that stuntmen are the ones getting shot and blown up. They're the ones risking it all for the best scenes in some of the most popular action movies in the world. And they're always in the background. They don't get the attention, and the film shifts our attention to Cole Seavers. But it's all style over substance. We don't really get any backstory with him. The closest thing we do get is seeing him being injured, and then it quickly cuts to 18 months later. We don't see this process of healing. We don't see how he develops on his own. We just get a lot of talking and monologuing, and that's it. It's mostly told and not shown, which is kind of a problem. And you can make a fun movie with character development that doesn't need to slow down the action. I mean, look at Deadpool. It's a great comedy action film that everyone loves, and it still has time to build up the character, to build up their backstory, and then has comedy on top of it. You don't need to have one or the other. And Ryan Gosling's Cole Seaver performs this stunt for film at the very beginning, and I like the introduction because we get to see right away who he is. He's a cool guy who's really good at doing what he does. He takes risks, who works every day doing insane, possibly lethal stunts. But there's nothing else on top of that, no personality, no quirk or extra motivation that makes his character tick, which is kind of a problem. He's not like Iron Man, where he has this sarcastic sense of humor or way with the ladies. He's not Batman, where he was wronged and spends most of the film trying to right this wrong. And he's not Jack Sparrow, where he has these quirks or strange personal traits that somehow compute into the film and serve a purpose later. No, he's just a stunt guy doing stunt guy things who happens to be in love with Emily Blunt's character, and that's it. There's no personal goal on top of it, no risk, no reward, nothing really else to latch onto, and that's kind of a problem. Emily Blunt and Ryan Gosling also have this forced romance, which kind of feeds into the idea of flat character. It was a problem I had with the film, and one I think a lot of people felt, which is just that the relationship is hard to believe. The chemistry is hard to see or follow, and for several reasons, I get that. See, Fall Guy isn't really a romance film, it's an action comedy, or an action adventure, or a romance action comedy adventure, or a tribute to the old Hollywood movie formulas where a hero must stop a bunch of bad guys, solve a crime he's been accused of, and get the girl. So, in a way, yes, it's a romance. There's a lot of romance happening at the beginning and near the end and in the middle. A lot of romance, and I'm not really opposed to it. It just doesn't feel earned or like it really matters. Just take a look, for example, at other films like La La Land or Carol or even Anyone But You. These films all have romantic elements, and they all give you the build-up. They all inform you of where these characters started, how they met, where they fall in love, and most importantly, why they fell in love. But because Fall Guy is so focused on becoming an action film, it sadly eschews any kind of reason to understand how our two leads fell in love, how they met, why they fell in love, or why they're still into each other. I don't know, except for because they're both, hot. That's all the movie really does. It doesn't really give you any reason to understand where they're both coming from. There's no personality underneath. And I just didn't think this film had enough. Especially when you want people to care about your film, it's very important that you give these kind of personal motivations. It'll make people see your film, be interested. You need to establish a basis for the characters feel how they do. Because when you have a movie that's 50% flirtatious banter, 30% action, and 20% plot exposition, you really need that romance to work, or else you just have a semi-charming movie with a romance in it that's founded on nothing. For example, I think the movie would have been better if instead of giving us this opening monologue and narration where Ryan Gosling's character explains who stuntmen are and what they do, they show that, and to be fair, they kinda do, but it's muddled by the narration and exposition. Have a day on set be the very first scene, and don't fill it with narration. Show the lead actor who doesn't want to do the stunt. Show Gosling, who's the stuntman, with no fear, who's willing to do it. Show Blunt as the director, who's enthralled by his determination. Don't wait till later in the film, which this movie does. Show all these elements right away. Establish why they both like each other. Establish both of their characters. She's the director, he's the stuntman, who just doesn't care. He will do whatever it takes, and she's excited by that. You'll have a reason to care about all these characters. Not only will you have a clear understanding where they're coming from, but you'll see their motivation. You'll feel what they feel. And it will allow you to become not only more emotionally involved, but remember the movie even more. Another issue with The Fall Guy is it has no idea what type of movie it wants to be. There's so many genres crammed in here, but it doesn't pick one, it doesn't stick to it. To be clear, it's possible to combine genres, but David Leitch at least kind of has a problem doing this. It was a slight issue in Bullet Train, and it's kind of a problem here. Maybe not with Deadpool 2, because they had the same writers from the first movie, and the action in that was very clean. And I think David Leitch is really great at straight action flicks, like with John Wick or Atomic Blonde. He's great, he really just does a good job, but when it comes to mixing and matching genres, it just feels hard to switch to multiple lanes, and it ends up becoming a mess where the plot isn't as streamlined and isn't as fun or concise to follow as it should be. I do really want to give this movie credit because the opening hour really does feel like a throwback movie, following actors and filmmakers and stuntmen as they're trying to make this movie, and it kind of shows you the problems that go on film sets. And it also has this cute little banner between Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt, but the action elements themselves don't really make themselves clear till about an hour into the film. And that's kind of an issue. Most people want to see the action right away. Me, personally, I thought this movie could have used some big stunt or big action sequence right away. Sure, they show that Ryan Gosling does all these dangerous stunts, but it just isn't enough and it doesn't feed into the plot as it does later. And if they had just put some stakes earlier on, I think it would have been more interesting. Yeah, they get into Ryan Gosling's backstory just a bit, but it's all surface level. It's really hard to invest in. Like I mentioned, they give you the basic facts. Gosling's a stuntman working on a movie set where he's pushed by the director to do these crazy stunts. And then there's the introduction of this hotshot actor, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, which feels way more underdeveloped than it should have. Aaron Taylor Johnson's supposed to be the biggest actor in the world. He's a huge guy. He's Ryan Gosling. He's Chris Pratt. He's Chris Evans and Chris Hemsworth, Ryan Reynolds, all rolled into one. But an issue is, you never get to see that. You don't even get to see who this guy is as an actor, because he's almost never on screen, which is pretty weird, because the character's disappearance later on in the film suggests he's a pretty big guy. When the actor goes missing, it kind of takes away from any stakes or worry you might feel for his character. I mean, I would like to care about what happens to Aaron Taylor Johnson's character, but he's just not in it too much, so I don't care. I wish they'd lean more into what they did with Chris Evans' role as a hotshot over-the-top leading man in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Yeah, he played an exaggerated stereotype of an actor, but it did work, and it was funny. Here, it's almost like they're meant to be kind of the same role. Taylor Johnson is the douche, and Ryan Gosling is the foil. You want him to overcome this main actor. You want to see the stuntman rise up and take down this guy who's getting credit for all his work, and who's a dick. And a good way to do that would be to establish that Taylor Johnson is a dick. But they don't really care about this. You know, they could have shown Taylor Johnson not caring about a stuntman, that he's only in it for the fame, and he's pretty much a dick on set every other day. But for some unknown reason, the film doesn't really give you this until the very end. And by then it's too late, because we're not invested in these characters. Even if Taylor Johnson's a jerk, he'd be worth investing your time in, because it's funny to watch people play douchebag actors. There's just something inherently entertaining about that. And the film just rarely takes the time, for some reason, to do that. And there's other characters who are kind of in this film who don't really have any stake in the story. Like, maybe a little, but not enough to rile things up. There's Ryan Gosling's stunt coordinator and buddy, played by Winston Duke, who really has such little character arc in the film, it's strange he's even in this. Like, I get it, I like this idea, having Ryan Gosling have a buddy who he can lean his shtick into, have someone to rub the occasional one-liner off of, talk about stunts, sure. But it doesn't factor into the plot enough. For example, when the mystery of the story finally kicks in, about an hour in, and Ryan Gosling stumbles into a hotel room where he finds a dead body and is now accused of murder, there isn't enough banter between the two. Like, it's funny if he spent a lot of time on the phone arguing with him or trying to convince Winston Duke he didn't do this crime, but instead the film just shifts into action mode and kind of fails at scaring that buddy comedy it could have been, or a comedy at all. It would have been better if there was more of a strong dynamic between the two, where maybe, let's say, Winston Duke thinks Ryan Gosling actually killed the guy in the bathtub, and he's convinced him he did not. It would bring such funny laughs, and could also serve as an action scene where the two are fighting and trying to defuse the situation. Then you'd get action and comedy merged together. Gosling's trying to prove he didn't commit a crime, and Winston Duke thinks he's fighting for his life. It would be over the top, funny, and perfectly suit this film's narrative tone. But the film's narrative tone is all over the place, and I think this is what I really want to talk about, because it's really a core problem with The Fall Guy. Now, this kind of does go hand in hand with the movie's confused genres, but I wanted to split these up because this appears to be one of the glaring reasons Fall Guy crashed at the box office. The film often veers between being a romance, a comedy, an action film, but struggles at marrying all three. And I guess a better example I'll refer to is The Nice Guys. Why? Because they're very similar. They're both comedies with detective elements starring Ryan Gosling, set against a Hollywood backdrop and framing murder, movies, and corruption as a narrative arc for a good time at the films. They both feel very fun. But where Nice Guys succeeded critically, not commercially sadly, Nice Guys does do a couple things better than The Fall Guy, and I think a big reason for that is the screenwriter, Shane Black. Black's writing in that film is very good, and I'm not trying to throw any shade on Fall Guy screenwriter Drew Pearce, but I think Fall Guy doesn't have what Nice Guys has. It doesn't have the same tight pacing, it doesn't have the one-liners, it doesn't have the clever character dynamics, it doesn't have the flow of comedy and action and emotion that comes with that film. And the reason for that is in Nice Guys, you have Ryan Gosling and Russell Crowe. It's a buddy comedy. Holland March, played by Ryan Gosling, and Jackson Healy, played by Crowe, are two complete opposites, yet they work so well together on screen because of their chemistry, and because buddy comedies are just objectively and inherently fun to watch. Adding into that, you have Ryan Gosling's relationship with his kid-daughter, played by Angourie Rice. The film kind of eschews that typical romance element you might get in a film like that, but it still works, because it has these femme fatale characters as well, and plenty of interesting relationships. Even the villains have these weird little quirks that the Fall Guys villains don't have. What you have in Fall Guy are these faceless goons who you don't even know the name of, where in Nice Guys, it's a running gag that one of the bad guys shares the same name as John Boy from the Waltons. It's funny, and it adds this extra thing that keeps you engaged and laughing even when the movie is just in downtime. It's always fast-paced, and it's always funny, whereas with The Fall Guy, it just feels like it takes so many breaks, and instead of mixing comedy into the action, they're almost separate genres combined, and it just feels a little off. I will give The Fall Guy some credit. They do have some really cool action scenes, like for example, this really cool neon fight sequence that almost looks like a comic book, which is pretty cool. There's a cool sword fight in a penthouse, which looks pretty cool too, and there's this scene on the Sydney Bridge where Ryan Gosling has to take down his attackers while being dragged alongside a car, and it's pretty cool. But the issue is, it doesn't really tie into the comedy or the rest of the story. I just feel like it's a totally separate action sequence that happens because the film needs it to. In the movie, it works because Ryan Gosling is a stunt guy and he's used to doing this kind of thing, but there isn't anything grounded in here, anything that really brings it into the story that makes it flow as great as it would in The Nice Guys. Like, I don't get why Ryan Gosling becomes so invested in trying to clear his name after he discovers a dead body in the tub. Like, yeah, you would try to do that, but the film doesn't really get into the personal quirks of it. You know, you don't really get to see him worried for his life. You don't get to see him wondering why he's being set up. It just feels so surface level and flat. Like he just immediately goes into stopping these bad guys because he's a stuntman, but there isn't anything else that adds into that. It would be funnier if he had some underlying goal, and my friend even pointed out to me at the beginning he couldn't make a decent cup of coffee, and he kept getting interrupted before he could drink his coffee, and I thought it would be so funny if this movie incorporated this almost like a running gag. Like every time he's about to drink his coffee, some shit goes down and he's pissed. He's annoyed. Why can't I just drink a decent cup of coffee? Then you could introduce all these cool action scenes, but build it on top of something else, like Ryan Gosling trying to enjoy his day. And then you have this Deadpool-esque sense of comedy, where Ryan Gosling could just be fighting and killing bad guys and just saying, could you just let me drink my coffee? I mean, some people might not like that, but I think it would add something else. It would be funny. It would just add this interesting dynamic. You could have this underlying element that gets served by some great action, like Deadpool 2 or The Nice Guys. It's just this movie doesn't have that tonal consistency. So when the action comes, there isn't anything else to it. Everything just screeches to a halt. It's just a cool action scene, but the story itself isn't that interesting. It's almost like the movie takes a break so the scene can happen, and it just isn't enough. It's like everything that could bring out a personality to this film is kind of undercooked, and I just don't get why. People love dogs. I mean, I love dogs, and dogs in film just make things better. When done right, of course, and John Wick proved this. One thing I don't really understand is they have a moment in this film where they introduce this dog that Ryan Gosling is driving his car, and he's being chased by these faceless goons, and he has to buckle up the dog, and it's just one scene, but I just thought it would be better if they kept the dog around, kept it as a recurring gag. I mean, I know people don't want to think they're ripping off John Wick, but it just would have been funny if the dog was kept around for some other gags. It worked in John Wick 4, it worked in all those films. I just think the film needs to elevate its action so it's more memorable. Like, for example, the inciting incident of the movie, which should set things in motion, takes way too long to get started. I won't lie, I really had no idea what this film would be about, other than Ryan Gosling's a stunt guy who loves the director, as evidenced by the trailers, and I thought he might also be a hitman or a bounty hunter, again, based on what the trailer presents, but it's just not in the film. One of the biggest problems with Fall Guy is it just really needed to get going earlier. Like I said, most of the first half of the film just has romance in it, and it just has this emphasis on filmmaking and making a movie with stuntmen, which I did like. But it needed something else because the romance, which feels very forced between Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt, just isn't enough, and like I said, it feels very cliche. It needs to introduce some action earlier and get the plot started right away. One of the biggest issues, in my opinion, is it isn't until over an hour into the film where we get some juicy meat to the story that might actually draw people in. It takes more than an hour for Ryan Gosling to go into the hotel room of Tom Ryder and try to find the actor who's apparently missing, where he finds a dead body in the bathtub. That's an inciting incident. That is something that I saw in the trailer, and I immediately thought, okay, there's going to be this cool action mystery element to the film. But it takes over an hour for that to happen. And it's a perfect setup. It just takes way too long to happen. And on top of that, there really isn't too much emphasis on Tom Ryder disappearing. He just kind of goes missing, and no one really talks about it. The producer of the film mentions they want to keep this quiet because, I get it, they're concerned, but they don't act concerned. So why make this character go missing if you just feel like no one's going to care in the story? It could have been introduced so much earlier and people all would have cared more. It didn't even need to be finding a dead body an hour earlier, but maybe we could have had people trying to kill Ryan Gosling. Maybe they could have introduced the idea that stuntmen are being picked off one by one way earlier in the film. And if that happened, and it didn't take more than an hour for this to occur, people would be interested. There would be this urgency to see this movie. There would be this excitement, but as it is, it's just kind of spends its first hour dawdling around, bouncing cheesy romance lines off each other, trying to make this feel like some kind of ode to old-fashioned filmmaking, which is fine, but for what the movie is marketed as, it just isn't that. What Fall Guy needs is ongoing stakes and rising action. It doesn't have that, and it becomes not urgent. It doesn't make things feel like anything's at stake. Like, let's say, for example, instead of trying to recover a phone with sensitive information on it, there was something else. Because let's face it, there's nothing personal about him just trying to recover a phone with a video of someone being killed on it. Like, it's not the end of the world device like in Mission Impossible movies. It isn't something that could change the fate of the world. Just one character. And this is not as interesting. Let's say, for example, there's going to be a stunt that is going to be performed, but it's going to be so dangerous, it's going to probably kill all the stunt drivers involved. Now you have a real threat, you have a real conflict for your final act, and you have some actual shit that could go down and change everything. If the final act focused on that, I think the movie would have had way more stakes, instead of just Ryan Gosling trying to get Tom Ryder to confess for murdering a guy. Like, it's just so lame. If they actually had all these stuntmen, Winston Duke's character, Emily Blunt's character, possibly be in danger, and Ryan Gosling has to save them by performing this epic stunt, it just would be interesting. You would have much more investment in the characters. You'd have much more investment in the action, the stakes. It just, as it is kind of flat and boring, and I think the final act really drags on. When you find out at the end of the film that the whole driving conflict of the movie is these stuntmen are being killed in an effort to make it seem like a suicide, because in reality, Tom Ryder, who went missing, has actually been planning this all along, because he accidentally killed one of the stuntmen in a fight, and his producer is trying to cover this up because he's the biggest action star in the world and they don't want controversy. I mean, just hearing that, it's pretty fucking convoluted. So much is going on for something that just is really kind of minute when you think about it. Like I said, it's not some big world-ending scheme. People aren't really in danger except for these unseen characters who we've never even met. Like all the stuntmen who are dead, we've never even met them. We don't know who they are, what their personalities are. It really just means nothing. I mean, it'd be one thing for there to be this whole global scheme where maybe they want to protect a bunch of people, but the filmmakers and producers going out of their way to kill people to make this whole film, it just feels kind of ridiculous, especially because we don't know any of the people who were killed. The Fall Guy's whole plot existing because one silly actor took a video on his phone and now they don't want anyone finding out, I don't know, it just isn't enough. And the way the film goes about dealing with this plot isn't enough either. Like I said, there's mostly these faceless henchmen who are Ryder's bodyguards, and they're the primary antagonists. At least give us one guy with some memorable qualities to make these antagonists worth watching. And the final set piece, like I said, should have more stakes. It should be something more at stake. Someone should be in danger, because all that's really happening is Ryan Gosling is just trying to perform some big jump that's going to clear his name. And to do that, he has to sneak Ryder into the car, then he has to get Ryder to confess, and then he actually has to do this jump, and that's it, mission accomplished. It's just feels not that great. You might say, oh, that's cool, he has to do this stunt. And yeah, I get they actually really did this cool stunt where real stuntmen jumped out of a car or jumped the car over this ledge. And yeah, there's just no actual stakes. It just feels so surface level. I mean, what's actually the risk? Gosling might go to jail? Like, it just isn't enough to me. And as it is, it's pretty convoluted. It could use way more. And if they did these things, it'd just be better. They do try to add this helicopter chase in after, where Ryder and the producer are trying to recover the phone with the incriminating evidence on it, but it really doesn't serve any other purpose other than allowing for a final cool set piece that really doesn't give you anything else. Like, Winston Duke's character finally shows up for some important role to emphasize his importance of a stuntman, where he and the team drag a giant inflatable balloon underneath the helicopter so Ryan Gosling's character can jump out with the evidence. It's cool, sure, but there really isn't anything more than a surface level action sequence. Like, nothing's really at stake. You didn't really get that bond between Winston Duke and Ryan Gosling. Like, they had scenes together, but I just didn't feel it. I didn't feel the personality, and now that they have them uniting to kind of save each other's lives, it just feels, not to earn. If Emily Blunt's character had been in danger, or some other stuntman would have been at risk of dying in the scene, like maybe Tom Ryder doesn't care if people get killed, he just wants to get the phone, there would have been more at stake. But just doesn't really have that, so it feels empty. So the lesson with The Fall Guy for me really is you can have a fun action movie, but you need to do more with it. You can't just make the action scenes. You need to add comedy to them. You need to make the romance elements have more comedy to them as well. It shouldn't feel like we're taking a break to go from comedy to action to romance. And also, the character arc should pay off. You shouldn't just have characters in this who have a couple scenes, couple lines of dialogue, and then come over at the end like Winston Duke's character, or even Stephanie Sue's character, who just kind of appears for one scene. You need to build these elements on top of each other. That's how you make a fun movie. A movie's fun because there's this consistency, there's this kind of understanding that we're almost like in on the joke. Fall Guy doesn't have that. It doesn't have too many jokes. It's more just kind of having these action scenes and then moving on from them and going about the plot. It needs to have this tonal consistency, this quickness that the movie just doesn't have. If it did have that, I think The Fall Guy would be really great. It needs to be a little tighter paced, and it just needs to be more entertaining. If the movie was tighter paced, I think it would be really good. So, at the end of the day, this movie's not bad, just could be a lot better.